Hello and welcome to the show. Well, the saying buyer beware was never more significant than today. Strangely enough, as we are seeing more help for buyers.
Property experts and the strategists and the specialists and the coaches and the mentors. So it's quite prevalent across a lot of different players within the industry.
The flood of inexperienced buyers agents who rely on little more than desktop valuations are making it difficult for unsuspecting investors to find experienced and professional buyers agents who add significant value to securing high-performing properties. To help, we thought that rather than talk to an industry professional who has a vested interest, it would be far more valuable to seek insights from an experienced, hands-on investor. So, Bushy talks to Azeem Rahman, who well and truly fits that bill. I will introduce Azeem to you later in the show. But first up, we tackle a very serious topic. Domestic violence in Australia is now so prevalent that it's impacting landlords and tenancy agreements. We discuss the built-in protections that every landlord needs to be aware of as we speak to Kieran Kannan from Odyssey Property Concierge in Brisbane. Before we start, I want to thank our supporters and content partners Realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance and Apira Marketing. You'll find us on all podcast players as The Property Hub, also on the Southern Cross Austereo Network, Hot Copper, and all social media platforms.
Finding the perfect investment property shouldn't be stressful. At Realty.com.au, we connect you with expert buyers agents who do all the hard work for you. Whether you're buying your first property or adding to your portfolio, our trusted buyers agents will guide you every step of the way. Realty.com.au, your gateway to the investment property of your dreams. Find your perfect buyers agent today. Visit Realty.com.au now to get started.
Realty Talk and your host, Bushy Martin.
Now, state and territory governments across the country are aware of the quite complex issues surrounding significant increases in the incidence of domestic violence, and in recent times have actually amended tenancy legislation to address the needs of those that are affected by it. But what does this mean for investor landlords and property owners? Well, to answer this, Kieran Kannan from Odyssey Property Concierge in Brisbane joins us to reveal what this means to you and what you can and need to be doing about it. So welcome back to Realty Talk, Kieran.
Thank you. Hello.
But it's an interesting topic and certainly something that's increasingly on the rise, sadly. I guess what I'd love for you to do to set the context around this topic is to give us a bit of a rundown on what has been the previously tenants' responsibilities for break lease due to domestic violence in the past.
Look, pre-October 2021, tenants really only had one option, and that was to break their lease. They would still need to wear the costs associated with breaking a lease, which obviously, if you're in that situation, the last thing you, I imagine, want to do is be paying all these fees. You just want to get somewhere safe. So October 2021, new legislation came into play around giving a reason for a tenant to terminate a tenancy, and that being completely legal, obviously no penalties. So that came in October. So basically now a tenant can fill out a Form 20, it's called. So that's just terminating a tenancy's interest in a property. Basically, they are required to give 7 days notice, and then after that 7 days, their interest in that property ends. Now, their interest in that property, that means their rent, that means any domestic violence related damage to the property. It does cover anything related to that. So their interest ends.
Okay, right. So they're basically clean slate. Point given obviously they're going to be focusing on more important life-threatening issues at that point in time. It absolves them effectively of any further responsibility for the property. I guess that the thing that flows from that for me, and I want to play devil's advocate a bit here, are these new domestic violence measures themselves then actually open to potential tenant abuse?
Look, I think anything anything is open to abuse, right? These changes came in to, I guess, protect those who need it, but there's always going to be people who will take advantage. I guess the process is, if you've got two tenants living in a property, one of the tenants fills out a Form 20, basically claiming that they have been a victim of domestic violence. Agents aren't actually allowed to communicate that to the co-tenant until the 7 days has lapsed, unless the agent feels that it's incorrect and they're going to challenge it in QCAT. But I mean, we generally would take these things very seriously. But then we did have a scenario where tenant A did fill in the Form 20, and then after the 7 days passed, we were able to inform tenant B. Tenant B had police records, had everything. They were in fact the victim of domestic violence. So it can be open to be abused. However, my thoughts on that kind of, if it protects 9 and one person takes advantage, the odds are still quite good.
Yeah, very well said. Now, while the new safeguards are quite understandable to help protect tenants that are suffering these difficult circumstances, what are the impacts, both financial and otherwise, for investor landlords that find their property in that position?
Look, it can be huge. I mean, if a tenant vacates after 7 days, your property is no longer income producing. Your agent will hopefully advertise the property immediately once they receive that Form 20. But I mean, as far as if there's domestic violence related damage to the property, that falls back on the landlord to remedy. If there is rent missing, you've just got to wear that. So I think realistically, the only way a landlord can safeguard themselves against this is to make sure they have the adequate insurance. So landlord insurance, there are so many insurance providers out there. So making sure that your policy actually covers this, because as we know, insurance companies, I won't say anything, but just make sure your policy does cover that. I mean, the statistics in Queensland are something like 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men will experience domestic violence. So they're pretty high figures, right? Mm. I think I saw a statistic this last financial year, where the 2nd of July, last financial year, around 50,000 protection orders were issued last year, just in Queensland. Like that is a lot of people experiencing domestic violence. So I guess, and that's on a rise from the previous year. So if you're going to protect yourself against being out of pocket, I think the only way to do that is to make sure you have the correct insurance.
Yeah, no, well said. One of the issues that are associated with it is we've talked about unpaid rent. We've talked about the reletting costs. We've talked about potentially malicious damage to properties that could be incurred in these situations where there's domestic violence going on. One of the things that I don't think gets a lot of airplay, and I'd love to expand on this, is that quite often it then becomes the landlord's responsibility to dispose of the tenant's abandoned possessions. Am I right in saying that? And if so, how is that managed in the context of the Queensland environment?
So in Queensland, we can't just dispose. We need to actually store. So we need to store belongings. Obviously, it's kind of categorized. So depending on what value we put on different things determines how long we have to store that for. So we did go to QCAT last year for a domestic violence case. Now, in this instance, even adjudicators aren't particularly sure where certain things fall. I guess maybe they haven't seen enough cases come through yet, but the legislation, I think the adjudicator at one point said to put it down to a drafting error. When I questioned how the legislation, it was almost contradictory within the same text. So, sorry, I've gone off topic there a little bit.
No, I haven't, because the interpretation...
Insurance...
Yeah, I think you've hit a really good point.
The interpretation.
The interpretation, it doesn't matter what it's written down, it's how it's then interpreted. And often it's going to be differently, and therefore it's not cast in stone anyway in relation to the way the position treatment is going to be looked after. But I guess the important point here is that it's not just a matter of going, right, we're going to take all of that tenant's possessions to the tip, which a landlord might be tempted to think. They have my understanding is they have a legal responsibility to want to store that in an effective. It may be a separate shed on the property if it's weatherproof and treated accordingly, or otherwise there's potentially going to be storage costs there to some degree. to give the tenant some opportunity when they're back on their feet to then reclaim those possessions that they had to walk away from. Am I right in saying that?
You are. However, so in other situations, so if a tenant just abandons a property, we need to still store their belongings. We can charge them for storage costs. It's not clear what happens or who pays the storage costs in a domestic violence situation. Right. So it will come down to, if you do end up in QCAT, it will come down to a ruling there. But I mean, I do feel that insurance, depending on the policy, would cover any associated costs.
Yeah, no, very good point.
Storage would come down.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I probably wouldn't mind drilling into the insurance piece a little bit more because you touched on it already. But yeah, I know from previous experience that if you're, as an investor, silly enough to buy the cheapest insurance that's available, it's generally cheap for a reason. And if you're getting a general insurance policy that doesn't really specialise in the landlord insurance piece, then you're exposing yourself to pretty considerable risk. You're able to, and without naming anyone, to keep it amenable to everyone, can you talk about some of the provisions in some of the specialist landlord insurance policies that will actually help them to mitigate the issues that they may incur if they're caught up in a domestic violence issue? And I'm talking here about,
Look, I've seen policies.
Yep, go on.
I've seen policies, and this is all kind of, I guess, quite new to insurance policies, and probably because domestic violence is, it's particularly peaked during COVID, and it's been unfortunately, it seems like a steady rise. So insurance policies have had to kind of update this. So I've seen policies that will include lost rent, will include reletting costs, will uncover any malicious damage to the property. So that's caused by, the perpetrator of the domestic violence. So it will cover like up to X amount of weeks because, obviously in today's climate, tenants are usually looking anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks out from their move date. So there's a very high possibility that you will have a period without rent. So making sure you've got a policy that covers that and it's not, there's no caveats around that, which there tend to be.
Yes.
Yeah. I think that will be your best safeguard.
Yeah, and I think there's also some of the policies will cover up to a year's worth of denial of access. If you're caught in a situation where one tenant leaves because of domestic violence, but the other perpetrator is potentially still on the property, but they're not paying rent, then you've got that potential. But I think some of the good policies also cover expenses relating to legal proceedings if you have to try and evict a tenant over the loss of rent and the opportunity for the cost of changing locks and whatnot. So I guess, or even the theft by some of the other tenants if that gets messed up in that whole situation. So I think, what's really clear for anyone listening in is have a damn good look at your landlord insurance policy to make sure that in the event it occurs, and it's an increasing exercise, that the only other thing that I think is probably worth mentioning here and talking directly to what you help people with is make sure you've got a damn good property manager on the team that's on the top of this so they understand what the legislation will and won't allow you to do, is issuing notices and treating it in the exact way, because as you know, if you overstep the mark or you don't issue a notice when you're meant to, that can unwind the whole position if it gets in front of a tribunal hearing or other hearing to make the determination. So
correct.
Good stuff there. One other thing, any comments on that, Kieran?
Look, the rules around, time frames from, once you've received that notice to being able to inform other parties, it's all very strict. So yes, you do need to make sure, if your property happens to be host to one of these scenarios, you would want to make sure that, you're across the legislation, your agent's across the legislation, and you can see it through, how it's going to end. It should all be quite predictable if all those steps are followed.
Yeah, no, well said. Final question then. Do you think changes need to be made to the newly instituted legislation to better protect the interests of all the parties?
Look, we mentioned earlier that it's obviously open to being abused. I think that it's been put into place for a very good reason, and that is the, spike in numbers. And so I think it's there to protect vulnerable people. And I think at the end of the day, like an investment, all investments carry a certain level of risk. But at the end of the day, you've got human beings living in your property, And I think that the statistics are really sad. Like I said, 1 in 4 women, 1 in 7 men. So maybe that should also be given some thought, especially if you've got an insurance policy. You don't need to be worried about like how much you're out of pocket. If you're comfortable that you are going to be covered, then that's okay. But I think something needed to be done. I don't think that a victim of domestic violence who is trying to flee for safety should be pinned for break lease costs, So yeah, I think that this is a really important amendment to legislation.
Yeah, extremely well said. And I think the human element here is important. It's very easy for investors to get caught up in spreadsheets and numbers and percentages. But at the end of the day, we're providing housing to humans that have families and issues that they're trying to contend with. There needs to be a level of empathy and passion that's added into that situation. And I know that good landlords will always think that way because they're thinking about the longevity and the harmony of the people that are having the enjoyment of living in their property. So look, I really want to thank you for getting to the heart of this growing and quite sensitive issue, and one that landlords and investors need to be more aware of and what they need to do to respond. So thanks for taking the time to share all of this with us here on the show today, Kieran.
Thanks for having me.
At Know How Property, we're more than just the best residential and commercial loan arranger. We craft a plan for your lifestyle and future with our 3-stage strategy. We start with your lifestyle strategy. Whether it's finding your dream home in the perfect location or adding to your residential or commercial portfolio, we listen to what you want and need to do. Next, we create a financial strategy. We dive deep to uncover what you can do, ensuring your finances are set up for success. Finally, we implement our validation strategy. We become your John West of property because it's the property we reject that makes sure you get the best. Know How Property. Smart, tailored strategies for your life and investments.
This is Realty Talk, powered by realty.com.au.
Now, buyers agents have become a bit of a flavour of the month in recent times, with a crowd of relatively new and many inexperienced buyers agents flooding the market. And a lot of them are relying on social media promotion and the increasingly accessibility of a lot of desktop data to present a quite compelling story on both themselves, an area, and a property. But sadly, they often turn out to be of questionable value, and it's generally way too late by the time an unsuspecting investor eventually finds this out. This is also making it a lot harder for the select few independent, experienced, and very professional buyers agents who add significant value to securing high-performing properties. So, should you use a buyer's agent? And if you do, how can you separate the best from the rest? Well, to help you answer this, we thought that rather than talk to an industry professional who's got a vested interest in pushing their own barrow, it's way more important to seek independent insights from an experienced hands-on investor. So, Azeem Rahman, who's a self-reliant investor that's grown a $3 million portfolio through sheer perseverance, determination, and grit over the last 8 years, joins us now to reveal his insights. So welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Bushy. And as we were just saying, offline earlier, that this is this I think will be a very interesting and insightful conversation, and one that we can probably unpack into detail down the track as well too, because there's a lot to actually unpack about this.
There is, and having spoken offline, I will get you onto the deep dive conversation on Get Invested to do exactly that, and also dive deep into your own personal journey. Given that you've self-driven and done that pretty much unaided, that says a lot about your resilience and your ability to learn and absorb and learn some lessons and keep going. So we'll have some fun with that, and we'll make sure that everyone keeps an eye out for it. But I guess sort of to hit to the dot points on the conversation today, can I get you to start by getting you to run through a bit of a summary of the tricks and traps that you've seen or experienced that a growing number of high-profile, pretty much instant overnight property expert buyers agents are using to actually lure unsuspecting investors, before we then deep dive onto a couple of the major ones?
The tricks and traps that I've witnessed with buyers agents and agencies is quite a lot in recent times, and in fact, it's actually with a lot of general professionals within the industry as well too, the so-called property experts and the strategists and the specialists and the coaches and the mentors. So it's quite prevalent across a lot of different players within the industry, but definitely a lot with the buyers agents. what I've seen is there is a lot of paid marketing that's happening at the moment on social media, particularly YouTube ads, Instagram Reels, and TikTok videos about boom locations. Live webinars is another one that I've seen happening a lot, when in actual fact it's a pre-recorded session, and what follows these sessions, should you attend, is relentless inquiry and follow-ups. There's a lot of offers that get put out there by agencies and agents, with an expiry date attached to them, or quote unquote limited time free resources, which they would typically say is valued at X dollars. Another trap that I've seen is charging a separate fee for a one-on-one strategy session, which is a big no-no from my perspective. Online courses, which in my opinion contradict the primary service of a buyer's agency and what they're intending to do for clients. Another one is suggesting only brand new properties is the way to go, and then they're the only types to purchase to scale and achieve your goals through property investing. There's a lot of discouragement out there to carry out your own due diligence and independent research. Suggestions of exclusiveness, that they have the only ones who have access to particular data or insights to a particular suburb or type of property. And the last one that I've seen is offering end-to-end services related to the whole purchasing process for a property.
Yes, sadly, I've been around a long time, and the colour of the clothes change, but the tactics don't. In that regard, as there's different technologies they use now to do the same thing, but it ends up with the same deception at the end of the day. Let's dive a bit deeper now with some of your thoughts on buyers agents, particularly those who offer exclusive, silent, off-market properties, which even that scares me a little bit, and or they don't allow you the time for the sufficient independent research and due diligence that needs to be done. Give us a download on that one.
My first thoughts, Bushy, is that if you are dealing with a buyer's agent who is operating in this manner, my thought is to walk away and find someone else. If you're not being given the opportunity to carry your own independent research, or who's only offering exclusive off-market opportunities, I'd be cautious of that. I think to break my response to that in two parts. Firstly, with silent off-market properties, there are a lot of buyers agents, especially the new and emerging ones who are overnight coming into the industry. They use the words interchangeably between a pre-market and off-market, and they're two different things, right? And the reality is, when you understand what truly is an off-market deal or off-market purchase, they don't happen often, and really good deals don't happen often. So I think it's important to realize if there's an agent or an agency out there who's suggesting this is what we do day in, day out, this is our bread and butter, I would be questioning that. I think it instills a sense of false superiority for investors, and it gives them a VIP mindset, which actually is a wrong approach to take. Now, when it comes to the due diligence, any seasoned investor who is listening right now would agree with me that it is critical to do your own independent research to ensure you're making a right purchase before you go ahead. Certain buyers agents out there will actually dissuade you from doing that, asserting that they've actually done all the due diligence and they've carried the independent research for you, which is true. That's what they should be doing. But what's really happening is they're behind closed doors. They're putting forward to you deals that have already been discussed and agreed with either developers or local sales agents, and they're being positioned to you as an off-market opportunity. The reality is everyone is using the same data sources, so they should be transparent about that with you. And anyone who claims of possessing exclusive insights in particular, as I said, isn't probably acting in your best interest.
Very good thoughts. There's a lot of gold right there. And as you sort of touched on, I think off-market properties, you've got to ask, why would a seller sell a property off-market unless there was a very good reason to it? Because you want as many buyers as you possibly could, trying to boost up the price. And yes, there are reasons. There's divorces, there's older people who don't want the fuss of people going through the home. There are valid reasons, but they are the tip of the iceberg, not the majority of the exercise. So there's some question marks there for me. The other thing that you made a really good point on, I think, and I'd like you to expand on, was the old one-stop shop, end-to-end service buyers agent businesses. Give us your thoughts on those.
Yeah, so there are certain individuals and companies out there that propose what I call an all-inclusive service, where they essentially oversee every aspect of the property transaction. And so this might include a mortgage broker, a conveyancer, a quantity surveyor, an accountant, and a property manager. Now, while this is obviously all critical roles and players in a property transaction, and it may appear as a convenient option for investors, it could actually serve as a smokescreen to conceal overpriced and substandard properties. And not only that, but something that a lot of people aren't aware of is that these buyers agents may be receiving referral fees for all of the professional services that they're introducing you to if they're not within their own agency and they're not actually, carrying out that particular service themselves. So I think it's important to remember that a buyer's agent is a very specific service, and a great one will excel in what they do, right? So their skills should be in relationship building, data, research and analysis, sourcing properties, and negotiating, which is an art and a science in itself. So if a buyer's agent is doing that well in itself, they probably shouldn't have a lot of time to be offering end-to-end services as well too. And the last thing I would get people to think about is additional services doesn't necessarily correlate to a high level of client service. So I think it's something to think about. And what I've seen in particular buyers agents do is they offer to help you to get your self-managed super fund to get set up as well too. And there's a lot of ancillary products and services that they offer out there in that regard.
Very good commentary. I've often said, because I'm vehement about this subject, for a couple of reasons, the ones that you've already touched on. But for me, I want robust discussions between different players in my property team. And where there's disagreements, that's where I actually do the most learning. So, because you can look at the pros and cons of what's being suggested. If it's being tested by other independent professionals who are good at what they do but totally unrelated to the rest of the team, then collectively, as long as you're managing your managers well, you're getting the benefit of all of their thoughts and then can make a much better informed decision yourself, rather than the one-stop shop where it's all they're protecting their own backsides, potentially, and not really giving you the opportunity to make that truly informed decision. So I love your thoughts on that. I guess the obvious thing that comes out of all this is how can investors then best avoid these tricks and traps?
Yeah, the sad reality is, you won't be able to gauge from a few initial interactions with someone, a buyer's agency, whether you're dealing with an ethic individual or company. It obviously doesn't happen instantly, but there are some practical things you can do. The first thing is don't trust social media, right? I think there is a plethora of existing and new buyer's agents who emerge every single day who are driving a lot of activity and marketing their way. So I would not be trusting social media. Yes, take it with a grain of salt, but there are a lot of, as we were discussing previously, Bushy, there are a lot of confident, articulate, well-spoken people who can convey their messages in such a way that can trigger certain things in your brain and follow you around on social media. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they are the right fit for you or they have the right intentions in mind for you. And if they're even experienced, those things you won't be able to see, on a YouTube video or on a reel on Instagram. The second practical thing to do is to spend the time to speak to many different buyer's agents. The reality is you will not be able to compare between them and understand and separate the good from the bad if you're not speaking to a lot of different buyer's agents. So regardless of whether you have your mind set on a particular agency or not, still spend the time speaking to a number of them so you can do a bit of objective comparison. The third thing I would do is use a third person as a sounding board. For me personally, with every decision that we make, I always use my wife as a sounding board. So for you, whoever that is, whether it's your spouse, a family member, mentor, or a coach, get their views on the buyer's agent that you're interacting with them by sharing the information with them, get them to hop onto the call with you and genuinely listen to what they have to say. Don't look for confirmation bias, but actually listen to what they have to share with you and take that into consideration. And the last thing that I think a lot of us don't do, but we should in this regard, is trust your gut. Don't merely rely on what you see, read, and hear. Your intuition plays a larger role than you actually think. So trust it.
Absolute gold right there. Because, you made a really interesting point about getting your partner or someone else in on the call. Because if you're intently listening to what they're saying, often you're missing the body language that's communicating far more than what the words are. Often. So if there's two of you doing that, then you've got a much better chance of that BS indicator that's firmly implanted in all of our guts to tell us what the true feeling is on that. And it's really, you make a really good, important point. If it doesn't feel right, doesn't matter how good someone is or says they are or can demonstrate, if it doesn't feel right, walk away. It really is as simple as that. So absolute gold there. And I guess brings us to an obvious conclusion then, when should investors consider using a buyer's agent? And if so, if they do, how can they ensure that they're engaging a good one?
So I think the short answer is it depends, and it depends on a range of factors. And I think you need to identify based on these factors whether it is appropriate for you. So for me and what I've come to see objectively, I think there's 5 key factors that you need to reflect on that should help you then determine whether you do need a buyer's agent. So those 5 factors are passion, data mindset, time, affordability, and risk appetite. So I'll just walk through these 5 factors in a little bit more detail. So when I talk about passion, you need to be asking yourself, do you have a genuine passion for real estate? Do you enjoy keeping up to date with what's happening? Is it something that you find yourself thinking about in your spare time? So I think passion is something to think about, because if you have a passion for anything in life, you will find the time to do it. So I think passion is a good starting point to reflect on. The second is data mindset. Property is a finance and a numbers game. So anyone who's seasoned in this game knows that. So you need to ask yourself, would you enjoy carrying out data-driven research and making decisions based on it? And if you're not, could you train your mind to actually enjoy it? I was actually someone who didn't enjoy the numbers, but I actually, over the course of understanding the process and going through it, my mind was actually trained to enjoy it. So don't just shut it off and say, okay, I'm not a numbers person, but dig a bit more deeper and ask yourself, is it something that I could potentially train myself to enjoy? The third is time. We're all time poor people, in this day and age, but the reality is you need to carve out a few hours to carry out the research for a particular period of time for, anywhere from 1 to 2 to 3 months. It's not a 365-day activity where you need to be doing research to purchase an investment property. If you're switched on, if you're committed, if you're dedicated, between 1 to 3 months, you should be able to secure a good property. So you need to then think about, okay, can I factor in a few hours of research every week for that period? The fourth one is affordability. I think this is a very key one, Bushy. A buyer's agent anywhere could be charging from $10,000 to $15,000, and you need to be thinking about the long term and not just tactically purchasing a investment property. Do I have the ability and the affordability to actually pay for a buyer's agent services for the long term? And if your strategy and your roadmap requires you to be purchasing, say, 4 or 5 investment properties, then that's anywhere from $60,000 to $75,000 in addition upfront costs that you will need to be paying. So can you afford to do that? Is something you need to ask yourself, because if you can't, then you're going to actually cause yourself issues down the track where you cannot execute on your long-term plans because you can't afford to pay for a buyer's agent, and you actually don't know how to carry out the due diligence yourself. And the last one is risk appetite. Would you have a good sleep at night factor knowing that someone else is in the driver's seat in achieving your financial goals, or conversely, would it give you peace of mind instead? So I think the answers to these factors should paint a clear picture in anyone's mind of if they do need a buyer's agent or not.
Beautifully summed up, and some really important things to take into consideration. And a lot of those that you mentioned, people don't spend much time thinking about at all. So really thanks for sharing that. Really great insights and warnings, I think, on making sure that you're finding a proven, experienced, independent buyer's agent with demonstrated experience if you're actually going to engage one. And if it's appropriate to do so, then you need to make sure that they can add significant value and actually help you turn your dreams into reality, rather than getting sucked in by the growing board of average ones that can leave you actually spending a lot of money and creating some nightmares in the experience. So look, again, really appreciate you coming on board to share all that with us, getting it firsthand from someone who's been in the trenches and doing it, rather than someone who's beating their own chest saying how good they are to defend their profession is worth a lot to us on the show here, and really appreciate you coming on board to spend the time with us.
Appreciate it, Bushy. Thank you so much.
Property deductions can save you thousands of dollars each year. To make sure you maximise deductions, you need to work with the most experienced quantity surveyor in the country. BMT Tax Depreciation is the leading specialist in the industry. They've completed over 700,000 tax deduction schedules for residential investment and commercial properties Australia-wide. BMT guarantee to find double your fee in the first full financial year deductions. Call BMT on 1300 728 726 today for an obligation-free quote.
Unlock bonus content now as a premium subscriber.
Join us for more property news each week with Realty Talk and Bushy's Get Invested podcast by subscribing to the Property Hub on all podcast players. Join the conversation on Facebook. Just search the Property Hub Collective and give us a like and make sure you follow. Thanks to our supporters and content partners realty.com.au, BMT Tax Depreciation, Know How Property Finance and Apiro Marketing. Until next week, all the best.